Hello, thank you for being here for a special edition of Art Rocks with me, James Fox Smith from Country Roads Magazine. Today we are coming to you from the LSU Museum of Art in the Shaw Center for the Arts in downtown Baton Rouge. LSU Museum of Art has been promised a major gift to diversify its collection and to support structural change within the institution. The $500,000 gift is part of an initiative by Winifred and Kevin P. Reilly. And joining us now to talk about how this money is being spent are Courtney Taylor, the museum's curator and director of public programs, and Clarke Brown, a Curatorial Fellow who's been brought in to support the initiative. Courtney, let's start with you. Can you please tell us more about how this initiative came about?
In early 2020, Winifred reached out and really was interested in helping support change at the museum. And so we just started sharing ideas about how that could happen. She was really interested in acquisitions. After our discussions, we talked about things we could add into that to make it an initiative that is acquisitions for change, but also to fund a curatorial fellowship and to fund staff training. The staff joined this network called the Of By For All Change Network that really kind of teaches staff to work in more of a community organizing model so we can make change in our practice kind of across the museum, up and down, and integrate into all aspects of our work, not just collections, not just exhibitions, and not just public programs.
Thank you. Help us to understand how new acquisitions and the goals and objectives of the effort can help the LSU Museum of Art to evolve.
The LSU Museum of Art has been evolving like all institutions for some time. It actually began as the Anglo-American Museum of Art and was a period room museum on LSU's campus. And then it moved here in 2005. And since then, those collections that were the core of the Anglo-American art, of course, were very limited in scope. And so the museum has been working to broaden its focus, be more contemporary, and be more representative of our community, but we haven't necessarily had the funds to kind of back up those plans. And so that's the great thing when Winifred and Kevin Reilly came and said, we can match your intention with dollars, then there's real movement for long-lasting change. Because once we acquire a work, we care for it in perpetuity. So we are looking to care for it as long as we can preserve it and have a real focus on showing the work, rotating it through the gallery so that there's always a piece on view. It's our goal that people see themselves in the gallery, but then we also take works off view so that we can keep rotating those works for the long-term future.
Clarke, the Reillys specifically requested that the museum bring on a curator with expertise in African American art to assist in identifying works for this collection. But they also wanted someone whose knowledge and experience could increase the museum's reach and its educational influence. Can you tell us a little about your background and the journey that brought you here?
I started my journey at Spelman College, where I received my BA in history. And while I was there, I joined a program with the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, specifically to increase the number of curators of color within the museum community. So we were able to take courses within the art history department. I took a couple of courses on African American art, curatorial practice. From there, I decided that I would like to make a career out of that. And so I took it even further and went and got my master's at New York University in museum studies. And there I expanded a little bit and not just focused on curatorial practice, but I also developed an interest in contemporary art and also diversity, equity, access, and inclusion initiatives. And so that was one thing that was a concentration for me and something that the LSU Museum of Art wants to work on here. So that's also something that I'll be working on.
The museum recently acquired a quilt of particular significance. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, so the museum recently acquired a quilt by Mary Lee Bendall. She's a member of the Gee's Bend Quilters from Alabama. It's a very rural part of Alabama, and this work will be classified as either folk art or African American vernacular art. We were kind of surprised that we were able to acquire this piece, and actually our director Daniel, it came to his attention through Instagram, so the power of social media is alive and well.
How does this acquisition add a new dimension, do you feel, to the museum's collection?
It just brings in a different conversation. We're talking about Southern art, folk art, self-taught artists, and also textiles. Just adding to that, we have a couple of other textile pieces within the collection, like our Sonia Clarke piece, which is behind me. It adds to history of African American cultures.
That's exciting. What do you keep in mind when you propose potential acquisitions?
This initiative is for underrepresented artists, so my goal is to seek out minorities, specifically if you are a person of color from the LGBTQ plus community, if you're a woman artists that have subject matter that really adds to the conversations that we already have here. For example, if we have a piece from our Anglo-Saxon collection of portraiture, that maybe we bring in something that's more contemporary that adds to that conversation, something that we can juxtapose and bring in a deeper level of understanding for our visitors.
Can you talk to us a little about your process? How do you go about researching artists and works of significance? And also, are there particular collections or resources or bodies of research even that guide your efforts?
Normally, I start with kind of looking at the collection here and what we already have and seeing how we can add to it, trying to find artists that are not here, and maybe if there's some that we may like, seeing what we can find from them. Also, talking to our curator here and the director and kind of seeing what some of their preferences may be, what kind of directions they would like to go in. Sometimes I use some old references from old textbooks if they're about African American art or contemporary art. Websites such as Art News, Art Forum, ArtNet. Also, you can go to auction house sites like Sotheby's or Christie's or Black-owned galleries. So trying to focus our efforts on not just supporting the overall process, but trying to make sure that the money that we spend definitely goes toward directly benefiting the artist.
Courtney, a question for you. Can you tell us about some of the pieces you're particularly excited to have seen added to the collection so far?
Yeah, the Carrie Mae Weems piece that I think kind of planted the seed for Winifred and Kevin Reilly from 2018 was a real game changer, I think, for the museum, because it directly kind of confronts the colonial and plantation histories here in Louisiana. Carrie Mae Weems is sitting in a plantation home in New Orleans, and then the text says that she's pondering the course of history upon the remains. So it was a really beautiful and poetic and deep reflection on the history of Louisiana. Inserting that in our galleries was huge, and I've been really proud of that piece. The Sonia Clarke piece was one that I had hoped to bring in from the beginning when I introduced that work to Winifred and Reilly, because we really didn't have kind of textile-based pieces. And to add on to what Clarke was saying about the quilts and these textile traditions, is that those are really rooted in kind of feminine history, passed on from grandmothers to mothers to daughters, an artistic tradition, but then just everyday life. So those, I think, really resonate more broadly and kind of tap into kind of a community. We had a Letitia Huckabee show here, and so many people connected. Everyone has those in their lives. So those have been really great additions for us.
Clarke, are there any particular pieces that have come about as part of this initiative that you're particularly excited about?
Yes, recently I had the opportunity to do a artist talk with the artist Madeline Sneed Grace, who's originally from Texas. We acquired the piece with the Reilly Initiative called Two Strikes, and it's a self-portrait of her. I found it really interesting to speak to her about her experiences, and the two strikes is really just the meaning of her trying to be successful as an artist, but also encountering the obstacles of being a woman and a Black woman within the art world, which is really a male-dominated field. Even still, it's still growing and diversifying. I think that really was relatable, not just for artists, but I think especially for women who work in the art world in general.
Louisiana's produced some influential artists, of course, whose work matches the objectives of this effort. Have you brought in, or are you targeting, works by any particular Louisiana artists that we can look forward to seeing here in the future?
Winifred and Kevin Reilly really hope that their gift kind of spurs other people to jump on board and join them. Their hope is to bring in what we call showstoppers, or pieces that we wouldn't otherwise be able to get in Louisiana. So a lot of our kind of more traditional collecting, donors who live here, Working with gallerists here, we get gifts from galleries such as Arthur Roger Gallery. Those processes can bring us Louisiana artists, so Winifred and Kevin Reilly are kind of looking abroad to help us acquire the pieces that we wouldn't otherwise be able to acquire.
Is there any preference given to late artists as opposed to contemporary, or is it focused across the time spectrum?
We've actually gone back and forth about that. We are focused more on contemporary art, but then there were a few pieces that we felt, a lot of this is like what becomes available in the secondary market, and then you kind of want to jump on that. So an Elizabeth Catlett piece came up for auction, and then also a piece by John Biggers, who of course is just amazing American, nationally known artist, but also really important regionally to the South. And so we jumped on those opportunities, but I think generally we are leaning toward living artists, because part of it too is supporting those artists while they're alive.
Can you help us to understand a little about the acquisition process?
Oh yeah, the acquisition process is long, so it starts with a conversation. Clarke just gave a list of places that you're looking all the time, and you just make notes of artists, and then something pops up or an opportunity arises. And so then we discuss as a staff, and when we decide that we think that we can align the dollars potentially with this moment, then we take it to the collections committee and it's considered. So we're considering, does it fill collecting gaps in terms of positionality or content? We're thinking about the content, will it resonate with this community? And also thinking about the long-term care. Can this staff size, can this museum care for the piece of this scale or of this like fragility level? Because we want pieces that can last long into the future for our visitors to enjoy and kind of make meaning in their lives around. So there's a lot, and so even when it gets voted on by the collections committee, it then has to go to the advisory board before they take on kind of fiduciary responsibility. So we really are thinking long term, and these decisions aren't made quickly or lightly.
So Clarke, the position involves the opportunity, I think, to curate a solo exhibition of your own, is that right? I'm sure you're already thinking about what that looks like. Can you tell us a little about your thoughts?
It does involve me being able to do a solo exhibition, probably not until closer to the end of the fellowship. So right now, this has been very much an experiential learning process for me, just getting my hands on the ground and really learning from Courtney and really just observing at this point and getting the opportunity to give my opinions and to help sometimes with hanging artworks or, of course, helping in the acquisition process and seeing how an exhibition is run from start to finish. But by probably around this time next year, we'll be formulating that solo exhibition.
It's exciting. You've already presented at least one exhibit, I think, that features some of the pieces that came out of the Reilly's donation, yeah? Can you tell us a little about that?
Some of those you can kind of see behind me include a piece by Sonia Clarke, Whitfield Lavelle, Madeline Sneed Graves, who I did an artist talk with, Carrie Mae Weems. Got to have those on display for everyone to see, and I think it's important that our audience does see them so they know the kind of progress that we're making here at the museum and what to look forward to in the future.
Courtney, it's a 2-year project, correct?
Yes.
So how does the museum and the community it serves, do you think, benefit from having the perspective of a curator with experience in African American art and also the study of diversity and inclusion in museum collections?
Well, I think Clarke is going to bring a lot to the table, and I really look forward to the future acquisitions. A lot of these were made before she came on board, so I think that the next year is going to be incredibly exciting. And one of the things that made Clarke such an attractive candidate is her interest in diversity and inclusion. So when she joins this kind of by For All network team that we have on staff, she's going to help us think about how to program in the community and program here at the museum, in addition to identifying and reinterpreting existing collections, because this is a new perspective, a way to acquire works. And we've talked about collection responsive works that can kind of really confront works that have difficult histories in our collections and think about commissioning those straight from artists. This is a really exciting time. I can only imagine what's going to happen in the future. And the great thing about Clarke is that she is a really great mix from Texas, went to Spelman, so has kind of regional knowledge, but also has a really national perspective from her training.
Thank you. It's sometimes assumed that minorities are less frequent visitors to art museums because they rarely see themselves in the exhibits that are presented there that really reflect their life experiences. Does that square at all with what you have seen at LSU Museum of Art, and do you think that's something that's changing?
Since I've been here, I've heard from other long-term staff and the community that the museum has never been more representative of the community than now, but I think we still have a long, long way to go. I think sometimes people are confused. Exhibitions are decoupled from collections, so our exhibitions have been diverse for a while, and I can say since I've been here for 5 years, the 9 solo shows that I've done, 5 of those shows have been artists of color. Actually, only 2 of those have been white men, which is typically they get all the solo shows. So I do think that's been a game changer for us, and we have seen change in the way we're responded to. But it's really a long-term process to kind of build trust and not be seen as this elitist institution. We're on the 5th floor of this downtown beautiful building, so that sometimes is even a barrier. But I do think things are changing, and having these acquisitions on rotation, on view all the time, is going to be part of that, a major step toward that change.
Courtney, Clarke, thanks again for having us at the museum today.